Hi everyone, this is Ellen from Astrology Journal. I want to talk about the Aquarius new moon that's coming up on January 29th at 7:36 Eastern Time. That's in the morning. So this is a chart for the Aquarius new moon, and the two themes that I see that I want to talk about are this theme of waiting. And the question I would ask is, how do we wait, or how do I wait? And the second theme is leadership. And the question there I would ask, because I focus on the inner side, is how do I lead myself? How do I conduct myself? So let's start with Mars. Mars is retrograde, so already we have the theme of waiting. It's rethinking, kind of revisiting, redoing. It's on hold in a sense when it's retrograde in terms of action. Or we could say its action is within, but we can think about this idea of action on hold. It's at 21 degrees of Cancer. And Mars retrograde in Cancer, we can think of this idea of pregnancy, expectancy, the baby in the womb. It's not out yet. It's not there yet. So we're waiting. We're waiting for the baby to be birthed. If you think about bread in the oven, we're waiting for the bread to be baked. It can only happen in its time. We can't rush it. We can't make it happen sooner. So this idea of waiting, there are times when we just have to wait for something. We have lots of dreams. There's a lot of Pisces energy in this chart. We have a lot of dreams and, visions for what we want, but sometimes you just have to wait until it's done. It's not there yet. And then we have Mars is at 21 degrees of Cancer, 21 degrees and some change. And so if we look up the Sabian symbol, we would look up 22 degrees. Mars is in the 22nd degree of Cancer. And what we find is something like a woman awaiting a boat. That may be exact, but it might be a little bit off. That's from James Burgess's website, jamesburgess.com. He lists out all of the Sabian symbols and gives his take on it. And so it's this theme. I remember when I read through what he was saying, this theme of waiting. So that is one of the reasons that I see this theme. Another reason I see this theme is there is this triangle pattern in the chart. And so it has Uranus here at the point, at the focal point, and then there's a sextile to Mars, and then there's a sextile to Venus. It's hard to tell where this is connecting, but it's Venus. Venus at 25 degrees Pisces is sextile Uranus at 23 degrees of Taurus. And then Venus and Mars are connected by a triangle. By a trine. So it makes this triangle in the chart. And this triangle is the head of a kite, but we don't have a kite in this chart. So in order for it to be a kite, there would need to be an opposition between Uranus and something over here in Scorpio, and then a trine coming from Mars down to that point in Scorpio, and a trine coming from Venus down to that point in Scorpio, and that would make a kite. But we don't have it. It's not there. There may be an asteroid or something like that there that I didn't look to, but if we just use what's here, it's not there. So that once again, there's this idea of something forming. Something's not complete. Something's in the works. Something's in the making. And the point of this kite is interesting. It's at Uranus and Taurus. And Taurus is an interesting sign from this perspective of waiting. I often think of Taurus as relating to the latency period when there's this rapid growth happening in the child. The child is in the process of forming, of forming into an adult. They're not yet in adolescence, so they're not going through that specific formation, but they're doing this growth beforehand. So their bodies aren't what they're going to be later, right? Their full size and shape and all of that isn't yet fully determined. So there's a sense of waiting. There's a sense of this precious being that isn't fully formed yet. And Taurus is about gifts and talents. And they have these gifts and talents and these inner, we can think of Taurus in terms of resources as our inner gifts, and then there's of course outer resources. But so these children have these incredible, extraordinary gifts and talents that are there. They may not fully understand what they are yet. We may not fully understand what they are yet, but they're there. So they're in process. There is this idea of being in process. So that is one way I think about it. So another way that I think about Taurus is this idea of the blade. Say if we think about a blade of grass, it's in Aries, the seed is being planted, and when it gets to 30 degrees on the wheel, that's the beginning of Taurus on the natural wheel. Then you start to see the blade of grass sticking up through the ground. Up until that point, it was underground. We couldn't see it. And if we didn't know there was anything there, we wouldn't know there was anything there. But once it comes up through the ground, we see it. But we don't know what it is necessarily. I'm using a blade of grass, but it could be anything. And we start seeing it popping up. We don't know what it is yet. It's not fully formed. We just know there's something there. There's some kind of life there. And it's in the process of growing. So again, we don't know what it is, and we sort of have to wait to see what it will become. So this idea of waiting. Another really interesting thing about Taurus is I often think about this form of forest or tree management called Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration, FMNR. It's a form of tree management for desert climates. And it's this idea that, how it came about is this guy was trying to help grow trees, like plant trees and get trees growing because it was really important for the desert environment. And he wasn't succeeding. And then he had this moment where he was looking at the shrub, or what he thought was a shrub. He'd been seeing shrubs all over the desert and didn't really think much of them. And when he took a closer look, he realized that these shrubs weren't shrubs, they were actually trees. They just weren't growing to maturity. So it totally changed his whole approach to, instead of planting trees, it's like we don't need to plant trees, we just need to help the ones that are there to grow. And so what wasn't able to happen is they weren't able to grow rapidly to a more mature state where they were more stable and withstand the environment. So they had to figure out how to do that. So part of what is involved in Taurus is also this need for support, this understanding of how to help the energy. So here's how I understand it. Because these trees had lots of different shoots. I'm not sure what the exact terminology is. And the thing is, because it had all those shoots, the energy couldn't go towards growing rapidly to an adult state. It was slowed down because it had to give all of its energy to all these different shoots. And so it made it vulnerable to various weather conditions or various, things that would happen, and to grazing and all that kind of stuff, because it just couldn't grow fast enough to get beyond that stage. And so what he realized that had to be done was to prune the trees so that the energy could go into just supporting a few different branches or a few different shoots or whatever. And then also he limited grazing. So there's this idea that I think of in Taurus that's about how do we support this rapid growth phase, and how do we protect it so that this rapid growth can happen, so the being can get to a more sturdy state that makes it more resilient to the environment around it. So that is a way that I think about it. So it's this idea of waiting. We're waiting for it to get to this mature state, but it's not just about waiting. It's like, how do we tend it? Also, do we know how to actually work with the resources, tend the resources that are available to us, that are there for us? And we can think about that in terms of our own gifts and talents too. And we can think about what is the moment right now? What do we need to be doing right now in this moment? We're not at our fully mature selves, for example. We can think of that as a metaphor, whatever it is in life. We don't have to be thinking about the child growing into an adult. It can be whatever. We're not at that realization point yet, but we're somewhere on the path. So what do we do in that moment? What is there for us to do in this moment? And Mars it can be impatient, and it may want to jump ahead. And by doing that, it sort of shoots itself in the foot. Because it may work temporarily, but ultimately it'll set us back at some point on our journey. So perhaps Mars is reflecting on that. Maybe it needs to learn some patience. Maybe that's something that's going on with Mars retrograde in Cancer. And the other thing, we need to Cancer, nurture and nourish. We need to nurture and nourish ourselves, and we need to nurture and nourish whatever our resources are. The earth, Taurus is very earth. It's an earth sign. It's very much about the earth. We need to nurture and nourish the resources of the earth. So those are all themes, all thoughts about this theme of waiting and this sort of expectancy and pregnancy. And it's not ready yet. It's not there yet. But it's so what is the moment right now? What is our skill level or our comfort level in terms of just waiting and not knowing what's coming next? So we may not know what it is specifically. Can we be patient and wait and see what it ends up being? See what it is, what is maturing, what is growing itself, instead of leaping on and then trying it to make it something perhaps that we might want to make it. So those are all themes of waiting. And Pisces, with Pisces strongly emphasized, we can also think of the idea of, instead of maturity, we can think of the vision or the dream or whatever, and we can think about maturity in terms of that. Has the vision matured yet, or is it still in process? And so the question is, what is there to do for us in the moment right now? And do we understand where we are? Do we understand the growth that's needing to happen now? Do we understand what needs to be tended and how to tend it? All of that matters. And sometimes the moment is we need to rest. Sometimes the moment is we need to sleep. Sometimes the moment is we just need to, chill. And sometimes the moment is we need to practice the scales or whatever. And there's another interesting thing about Taurus, especially because Taurus has to do with singers. I remember watching a video. I talked about this in another video a long time ago, I think. But I saw a video where somebody was looking at Michael, the evolution, the quality of Michael Jackson's singing voice over his lifetime, so from childhood to his later adulthood. And what his assessment was that his voice deteriorated over time. Even though he was still a great singer, his voice clearly had deteriorated. So his judgment was that Michael had sung maybe too much and also in too high ranges or too extreme ranges for what was possible for his voice at that time. And that's a really tricky thing, this idea of what's possible. Because just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. If we're thinking long term in terms of the development of something, the question is what we're doing right now going to set us up for long-term success, or is it going to set us up for a deterioration over time? It's really interesting. Capricorn, so Taurus is the first earth sign, and Capricorn is the final earth sign, and Capricorn has to do with this idea of maturation, maturity, and it also has to do with old age. So in my view, we tend to equate growing decrepit with growing old. And I think they're two different things. And I think the reason we get into old age and we find ourselves deteriorating is because we haven't actually learned the art and skill of life. And we've perhaps been taxing ourselves beyond, just not understanding just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. So in other words, we think I can do it, so I'm going to do it. And we're not understanding the moment, what's actually needing to grow and be supported in this moment. We're instead focusing on the goal, the ultimate, the mountain peak, in Capricorn, mountain goat, the top of the mountain, and we're not really paying attention to what we need to be doing right now. So for a child, when we go back to, if we go back to this idea of singing, I've heard from a couple of people. I don't sing, and I don't really listen to a ton of singing, but I have heard from a couple of professional singers, that I've listened to on YouTube, that when you're a child, you really need to hold off on really working your voice really hard, because you don't, for example, have your diaphragm can't really do what it needs to do to support your voice, so you'll end up straining different parts of your body to do what you want it to do, and that ultimately works against you. And then I assume there's probably maturation of vocal cords and all of that also is relevant. But anyway, so what is in the moment? What's actually there for us to do? And do we really understand that, each of us individually? But I also think humanity as a whole. Aquarius is strong in this chart too, and that's that idea of a humanity, and of course Uranus in Taurus. Humanity. Have we as humanity truly understood how to develop our gifts and talents and resources, both in terms of the gifts and talents that a person has, but also the gifts and resources that the earth provides for us? Have we truly understood how to steward those, how to work with those in such a way that we don't just develop a gift and talent so we can we can make money. Taurus has to do with money, but also so that we can grow old in a way where we don't lose our capacities over time. And maybe we can even improve them. I personally think that we don't know what the limit is in terms of human possibility if we understand the moment in each moment we're in. Virgo is the third earth sign, and it is also featured in this chart in conjunct between Mars and Ceres. And Ceres also has to do with this idea of the earth and specifically agriculture. So again, we have this theme of how do we tend the earth, and how do we really do that in a way that actually allows the earth to provide for us long term instead of us depleting the earth over the long term. But anyway, this inconjunct, it's a waxing inconjunct. I've talked a ton about this in the, over the last few videos, I've talked a ton about it. I don't remember specifically which ones. But we have the inconjunct falls at 0 degrees of Virgo, and so I say that it's Virgoan in nature. The inconjunct generally is about this idea of making adjustments, and Virgo is about this idea of practice and skill development. So by entering into practice and developing skill, we're better able to make the appropriate adjustments. So this whole Earth triangle trine is involved in this chart. So anyway, those are all my thoughts on this theme of waiting. And then we have this theme of leadership, and that I see because the new moon, the sun and the moon are in Aquarius. And then also, if we look at Mars, it started its retrograde cycle in Leo. And Leo we can think of as a leadership sign, and also Mars as ruler of Aries we can think of as having to do with leadership. And so Mars is it turned back from going further in Leo, and it's now going through Cancer. So perhaps it's thinking on this idea of leadership. And the Sabian symbol for 9 is actually for 10 degrees of Aquarius. I don't remember exactly what it is, but it's this idea of popularity. Hang on, let me look at it. So it is a popularity that proves ephemeral, and that's also from James Burgess's site. So it's a popularity that proves ephemeral. And when I think about that, when it comes to leadership, what comes to my mind is the idea that So part of the theme of this leadership, I was focusing at the beginning on, how do we lead ourselves, but what criteria are we using to judge whether someone is a good leader or not? And I think one of the things that we use is this idea of popularity and glamour, Pisces being about glamour, and Neptune strong in its own sign of Pisces, being about glamour. And so there's this... Pisces is a fish. There's this idea of the scales, right? And the scales falling from our eyes. So something becoming clear, us awakening to, becoming aware of, Aquarius awaken, Pisces awareness. So perhaps during this month, we will see something in a new way. There's also Gemini involved in this, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but that's this idea of perspective. Mercury being in Aquarius, Mercury rules Gemini. That's one way it's there, but there's another way that I want to talk about. So the idea of these are maybe scales may be falling from our eyes. Maybe we'll see something in a way that we hadn't seen it before, and that will sort of give us insight into how we have been thinking about leadership and what we've been looking for in leadership. And maybe we're understanding it's not exactly right, it's not exactly true. Jupiter, traditional ruler of Pisces, is about truth and lies, and it's about what we believe and what we don't believe. And it also is retrograde. So I'm sort of thinking there might be this sort of unveiling happening within each of us, having to do with this idea of leadership, and we may be seeing and understanding leadership in new ways, and maybe questioning how, the judgments we've been making around leadership. What we believed was good leadership, maybe we realize wasn't, and what we thought wasn't good leadership, maybe we'll realize what was good leadership. So that's one possibility. And then in terms of how do we conduct ourselves, how do we lead ourselves? Well, what we think of that makes a good leader, that will influence how we're leading our own lives. So if we want to tie together the themes of waiting and expectation, is good leadership about getting us to prodding us beyond where we really are, to be ahead of where we really are for some sort of outer gain? Or is good leadership about understanding where we actually are and what we really need? There's a really great story about Craig Alexander. Craig Alexander was a triathlete, an Ironman triathlete. He's sort of a legend in the field among some others. And he tells a story, I've probably told this before, but he tells a story of when he was first starting out as a triathlete. He didn't have a background in endurance training, and he understood that he needed to build his aerobic base. So he was training, doing a lot of, slower endurance training. And people, other athletes would be saying, "What are you doing? You could be winning these races. You could be, on the podium." But he knew that he needed to develop his aerobic engine. And so he didn't give in to the pressure. And because he did that, because he didn't give in to the pressure, because he knew the moment for himself, he ultimately went on to win multiple Ironman titles, and is a legend in the field, in the sport. So this idea of knowing the moment, what's really true for us, what is really the way that we develop our gifts and talents? How do we lead ourselves? How do we conduct ourselves? What are we saying yes to? What do we believe is true? And what do we believe is not true? What do we believe about ourselves? Taurus is self-relationship. Venus is in Pisces. Maybe some scales will be coming off of our eyes relating to our self-relationship. So there's another thing that I want to talk about here. It's a little bit geeky. So if I've pretty much said what I need to say. But over here on the lower right, I had been using this to just log the quadrants, how many planets are in each quadrant. But I don't really need it for that because you can see everything over here. You can actually see the elements here. But I decided to make this the elements. And it's really interesting because the way that I'm doing this wheel is, so the lower left is the fire signs, the lower right is the earth signs, the upper right is the air signs, and the upper left is the water signs. And that's the natural order of the elements around the wheel. So it starts with fire, the Aries starts the natural wheel, Aries to Taurus to Gemini to Cancer, then Leo to Virgo to Libra to Scorpio, and then Sagittarius to Capricorn to Aquarius to Pisces. So this is the natural order. And you'll notice that setting it up this way, what we have is fire signs diagonally across from fire signs, we'll say, is the air signs. And when we look on the wheel, the fire signs are opposed the earth signs. So we have Aries opposed, fire signs opposed the air signs. So we have Aries opposed Libra, we have Leo opposed Aquarius, and we have Sagittarius opposed Gemini. And the same is true here. We have the diagonal of earth and water, And yeah, all earth and water signs are opposed to each other. So earth is opposed, Taurus is opposed Scorpio, Virgo is opposed Pisces, and Capricorn is opposed Cancer. So the other thing to know about these diagonals is fire and air are always opposed, and water and earth are always opposed, but they're also potentially sextile each other. So meaning fire and air are sextile or opposed each other. So here's Aries, it's opposed Libra, and then sextile it going in the in the clockwise direction of the chart is Aquarius, and sextile going in the counterclockwise direction is Gemini. So Aries is sextile Gemini, the other two air signs. It's opposed one air sign, it's sextile the others two. And I can go through all of these. So I can go through every air sign and every fire sign and find the same things. If I look at Gemini, it is sextile Aries and Leo in addition to being opposed Sagittarius. And if I do the same thing for the fire and for the earth and water, so we look at Taurus, it's opposed Scorpio, we already know that, and it's sextile Pisces and it's sextile Cancer. If we look at Pisces, it's opposed Virgo, and it's sextile Capricorn, and it's sextile Taurus. So it's the same for these two diagonals. They're either opposed or opposite each other. So when we look at this diagram, what we get is this idea that what we're seeing is there's oppositions or sextiles in this chart. So we look at this and we can be like, oh, I wonder what that is. There's 6 planets here and only one here. Is that an opposition or is that a sextile? What's going on there? And then the other thing that's even more interesting, given Aquarius and Pisces here, is every other permutation. So if we, so every other permutation in terms of looking at 2 quadrants at a time. So we have on the left we have water and fire. On the right we have air and earth. On the bottom we have fire and earth, and on the top we have water and air. And no matter which permutation you look at, the signs, so those elements will be either, or the signs from those elements will be either semi-sextile, square, or inconjunct. So I'll just walk through one of them. So if we have the fire signs, if we look at a fire sign and we look at a water sign. So here we have Pisces and Aries. So these are sextile. They're one sign apart. They're sextile. And then if we look at Pisces and we go around to the after, so the first fire sign is Aries. We already established that. It's semi-sextile. If we go around to the next one, it's Leo. And these, Pisces and Leo, are inconjunct. And we go around to the next one, we get to Sagittarius. Sagittarius and Pisces are square. And if we just do the same thing for Aries, just to do one more, so we know that it's sextile Pisces. And if we go around to the next water sign, the first one we get to is Cancer, that's square. And then the next one we get to is Scorpio, and that is inconjunct Aries. And you can test this for yourself. You can look at every single possibility and you'll find the same situation. So we see here, we see on top, there's air and water. There are 5 water signs and 6 air signs. And it's like, well, what's going on there? That's kind of interesting. Well, we know they're going to be either semi-sextile, inconjunct, or square, or some permutation of all of those. And so what we see in the chart is square, Aquarius and Pisces are the 2 signs that are emphasized. And so we have the semi-sextile energy. And the semi-sextile energy that's 30 degrees, and 30 degrees begins at 0 degrees of Taurus. So we have this Taurus energy again. So this idea of our gifts and talents, and with that, the idea of how do we wait? What is the moment right now? Are we being in the moment right now, or are we trying to jump ahead to something else? But the other interesting thing is it's not just the semi-sextile that's involved here. If we look at the next air sign after Pisces, we get to Gemini, and Jupiter is there. So there's a square going on here too. And if we look at Aquarius and the next water sign after Pisces, we find that Mars is there. And so the main thing that's happening is obviously here, but in Tarot they have this idea, or they have this thing that they do where they'll throw a clarifier card. So they'll get a card and they're like, I'm not sure how to read this in this context. And so they'll throw a clarifier card. And so perhaps we can think of Jupiter and Mars as kind of like clarifier archetypes or energies for this pattern here. And so that gives us the idea of Jupiter and truth and lies in different perspectives, perhaps leading to scales falling from our eyes and seeing a truth, a layer of truth that we weren't aware of before. And perhaps what those scales falling from our eyes will be doing is helping us see into ourselves more. And instead of if we think about Cancer and also Gemini childhood, when we're young, we're all imprinted with the social mores around us and all that kind of stuff. Jupiter, social mores around us, and also the structures, the institutions, the rules and the regulations. That's Saturn. All of those things imprint on us. And then also our relationships, Venus, our relationships. And to the extent that those are in alignment with who we are, that's great. Then we go through life with a model that fits with who we are. But to the extent that they're out of alignment with who we really are, and to the extent that we shape ourselves into how we've been seen, what's been reflected back to us, what's been conditioned in us, and all that kind of stuff, we're out of alignment with who we really are. So we're out of alignment with the truth of who we are. So as these scales fall, perhaps we'll find ourselves able to fall, sort of shift more into alignment, adjust, we could say, more into alignment, going back to this idea of the inconjunct here, adjust more into alignment with who we really are. Jupiter and Mars are novile one another. This is a waxing novile, and that novile has to do with the promise of things to come. And so to the extent that we're able to shift back, get a new perspective, and see things in a new way, we will have a better understanding of who we really are, as opposed to going back to the leadership concept, as opposed to the idea of the external model of leadership that maybe isn't in alignment with who we are, and maybe isn't in alignment with good leadership. And so that we may be able to get more into alignment with who we are, and thus better lead ourselves, better conduct ourselves, and better be able to judge leadership out there in the world. And then also, of course, getting into greater alignment with who we really are. And then again, Aquarius and here in particular, Ceres and Mars, we already talked about, is inconjunct. That's that relationship between air and water. And again, this idea of adjusting who I am, making adjustments to my sense of self. And so that's the promise to come with both Mars and Jupiter retrograde, reflecting, thinking back on, and this idea is that we're really trying to figure out who we really are, and perhaps also what we truly want to birth. And we know that we can better know that by knowing who we are. So I really got into the sort of the geeky weeds there. I hope that was okay. I think that's everything I have to say. There's, of course, always tons more that one can say about a chart, but I'll leave it there. Those were the two themes, the idea of this how do we wait, and what that means, what waiting means, and what's there in the moment, and all of that kind of stuff. And then this idea of leadership, how do we conduct ourselves, how do we lead ourselves, and that leading to this idea of, do we really know who we are? Have we truly understood who we are? Have we been adapting ourselves, adjusting ourselves to the expectations, interesting use of that word, expectations of others, and are perhaps the energies this month will be helping us see things in new ways, which will in turn help us better understand ourselves, which will allow us to better conduct our lives, to conduct ourselves, to lead our lives. And maybe that leadership, that ability to conduct ourselves, will include recognizing that even though everybody says I should do this other thing, the moment is actually this. I understand that this is the moment for me. And not meaning the moment out there where everything's going to shine, but I'm in this moment, and because I'm in this moment, that means this thing, and I'm going to stick to that, regardless of what everybody else says. So that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening. I hope there was something helpful for you. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so. If you have subscribed, thank you so much. It means the world to me. And with that, I'm going to end this video. Again, thank you so much. Take care. Bye.